Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side, the video series. This is the opportunity for me to read my newsletter to you, along with additional information, backstory, extra jokes, or whatever else comes up. Think of this in a way as the director's cut version of the newsletter, or even a podcast version, I suppose. At any rate, here is the newsletter for the week of March 12th through 19th. The title is Tales from the Jar Side, AI is Taking Our Jobs, an interesting article. The Four Quadrants of American Politics, a cliche at a memorial service, but a good one, a new Mockito video, and the normal amusing tweets and toots. The subtitle this week is, what do you call someone who points out the obvious? Answer, someone who points out the obvious. Wait a second. There, got the rim shot ready. Okay, welcome fellow jarheads to Tales from the Jar Side, the Cousin IT newsletter for the week of March 12th through 19th, 2023. My name is Ken Cousin. I'll be your host for this. This week I taught the second week of my Spring and Spring Boot in 3 weeks course on the O'Reilly Learning Platform, and my Functional Java Basics course as an NFJS, no fluff, just stuff virtual workshop. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, please subscribe using the button on the newsletter or, of course, the subscribe button on the video. So, first section, AI took our jobs. Of course, the reference to the South Park gag, running gag on South Park. This week, I read an excellent blog post by someone named Justin Searles entitled, How to Tell If AI Threatens Your Job. And if I open that link here, you can see it. The link works, so you're welcome to take a look. It's actually a rather interesting blog post, but I'm going to give you some of the high points now. It's very well written, and I recommend you take a look, but here's a summary. So, in a section called 3 Simple Rules for Keeping Your Job, Searles points out that there are 3 categories of tasks that AI and AI-based tools are particularly bad at. So if your job involves one or more of them, you're probably safe, at least for the time being. Now, the categories that those tasks fall into are either novel, one being novel. If you do something that has never been done before, so therefore it's not well represented in the training data for the AI, then you're probably safe because an AI is not going to come up with something that hasn't been done before. Very likely not the right thing, even if it does come up with something. Number 2 was unpredictable. The idea is it helps if the solutions you devise are not obvious from the original description of the problem, because that's what an AI is trying to do. It's trying to pattern match from that description. So if the eventual correct way to go is not obvious from that, that's in your favor. And finally, number 3 is fragile. AIs are notoriously imprecise. Sometimes they even get simple math problems wrong. So given that they're just doing pattern matching, they're just matching patterns from the training data, maybe that's not surprising. So if you're developing something where changing of a single detail affects the entire solution, AI tools are going to struggle. Now, I use an AI tool to help me coding. That's the one known as GitHub Copilot. You've probably heard of that one. And I use it for my regular coding, which is Java, sometimes Kotlin. I haven't done much with Groovy with it. Those are the languages I spend most of my time on. And I actually do subscribe to this. I have a plugin for IntelliJ. There's a plugin available for VS Code as well, I'm pretty sure. So if you're interested, you could take a look. And I noticed that it really is a major time saver for me, but it's still wrong a lot. It still guesses what it thinks I'm trying to do and gets the spirit wrong. That's not the actual idea. So any developer who uses it quickly realizes you've got to keep a pretty close eye on it because it does have a tendency to be wrong. You have to know what it is you want, and you also have to know how to describe it in a way that the AI will guess correctly. My teaching job, of course, means I teach a lot of similar courses and a lot of courses over again. So that's ideal for it. I mean, it's perfect. It guesses what I've done in the past, and yet even so, it's still wrong a lot. So you have to watch it. But it is very helpful, and that ties into another video I watched on Nebula, the Nebula site, which I list here, by the way. That's nebula.tv. I don't remember what the actual video was that I watched here on Nebula that made this reference, but it basically had a lawyer talking about using ChatGPT to help with some of the routine parts of the job. And his opinion was that ChatGPT is not necessarily going to put lawyers out of work, but a lawyer who knows how to use that tool will have a competitive advantage over lawyers who don't know how to use that tool. And that's partly my experience with the coding assist as well, that especially when I have a task to do and I don't remember the details of the API in any great form, then the ChatGPT, or rather in my case, GitHub Copilot, which is based on the same OpenAI underlying infrastructure, that does tend to save me a lot of time. So that can be very helpful. Now, of course, the real danger, in my opinion, and I think I saw this echoed somewhere else, is that the danger isn't that an AI tool is going to put you out of a job, because you'll realize pretty quickly that's very unlikely. The danger is that your manager or someone higher up in the management hierarchy who doesn't really understand these issues and doesn't really understand your value and what you do, they'll think an AI can replace you. And that's going to lead to problems. At minimum, I try to emphasize that the danger isn't that an AI can do your job. It's that some manager above you will think an AI can do your job. And that would lead to a devaluation of you and your job, potentially, possibly to the point that the manager tries to eliminate people in favor of AIs, and then they'll suffer the consequences. Because again, many problems fit into those categories we were talking about above. My suggestion is that when you communicate with non-technical people about this stuff, mention those points, the idea of jobs being novel and unpredictable, and again, solutions being fragile. These are really important, but also point out that the way to think about one of these AI tools is as some kind of not very bright, inexperienced assistant. They can do a lot of work for you, and they can do it very, very quickly, but you have to watch them. You wouldn't have them with sign-off authority on your contract, that sort of thing. You just have them do the work you don't feel like doing, and helpful stuff like that. You could also get into the assorted legal issues and the issues of bias that are inherent in any training set. But a lot of companies will not find that persuasive if they think they can get away with it and still save a lot of money. If they think that they're not going to save money, then they'll care. But money tends to overwhelm. Monetary pressures tend to get otherwise ethical people to operate unethically. It's something I've seen over and over again in the business world, sadly. Now, the post was written by a consultant, and that triggered some old stories that I've been carrying around a while. One is a story about a plant manager having difficulty with a particular machine in the plant that kept vibrating itself into falling apart. And he hired a consultant to come in and fix it. The consultant looked the machine over, tightened one screw, which fixed the problem, and then sent the manager a bill for $10,000. The plant manager was outraged that the 10 minutes worth of work would cost that much. So the consultant followed up with an itemized bill, which was turn one screw, $5, knowing which screw to turn, $9,995. I mean, that's the key. The advantage of an experienced person over any AI tool, at least for the time being, is they'll know which screw to turn. They know the rules and they know when to break them. In fact, the real value of an expert is they see quickly to the key problems in any actual situation. They may not have the solution right away, but they'll know which problems matter, and that's important. By contrast, just so I don't speak too highly in favor of consultants, my other favorite story about consultants is a definition. A consultant is someone who borrows your watch, tells you what time it is, pockets the watch, and then sends you a bill for it. That's good work if you can get it. Next section, the 4 quadrants of American politics. Now, this is another article I ran across. Now, this was in The Atlantic, and I'm a subscriber, so I put the link to the actual article. I don't know what'll happen if you're not a subscriber, how much of it you'll be able to read, whether you'll be able to read an article or not before you have to subscribe. But I thought it was very interesting, and it's by Ronald Brownstein here. I assume it's pronounced Brownstein, on why Congress doesn't work. And the idea is that he reports on a study that was a statistical study of all 435 districts in the U.S. House of Representatives and evaluates them according to only two criteria. One was the percentage of minorities defined as anybody non-white relative to the national average, and the percentage of college-educated whites, again, relative to national average. And then tried to determine the likelihood of those two predicting the party of the representatives from that district. Now, normally when you streamline everything down to, reduce it down to just two axes, there are so many exceptions that there's not really a lot of useful information here. But in this case, it looked pretty good. They divided the four quadrants as low, low for both, low for non-whites and high for education, the other way around, high, low, and then high for both. So the conclusions, first of all, were pretty intuitive if you've been watching anything in American politics. Republicans tend to dominate the low, low category, sometimes referred to as low information voters, especially if they're primarily a low percentage, low diversity in that district, while Democrats do well, but not nearly as dominant in the high group, and Democrats also lead in the other two, the high-low and the low-high groups. The article suggests that the last few major so-called wave elections drove out most of the politicians that crossed those borders, those boundaries, like Democrats in low districts or Republicans in high ones, which makes the national divide more of a chasm, as they say, making it very hard to ever compromise on anything. So the real conclusion of the article was that the district numbers these days are very, very balanced across the country for assorted reasons, including things like redistricting or voter suppression or just simple gerrymandering, that the House is likely to be very, very close. House races are likely to be very, very close overall for control of the House and swing wildly back and forth over the next few elections, much as they have done over the last couple. So, at any rate, I thought it was an interesting article. You may or may not be interested. They didn't have the data in it, which I was a little surprised by. They didn't even have a link to the data. So I went to this, my congressional district, which is in the site called, the U.S. Census, census.gov. So this was information about my particular district that I'm in, and I am in District 2. Now, it's not showing up on this figure, but I did get a picture of it when it did. And you can see that in Connecticut, District 2 is almost half the state. Now, it's a very rural area, and it's very large, even though the population is relatively small. That's why it's all one district. And what I looked at from the data is it said that we are apparently in the low-high category, meaning our diversity is much lower than the national average, and that certainly fits in with my experience. But we're higher on the education measure than the national average, but only by 3 points. I thought we would be better than that, but no, only by a few points on that. And our representative, just to compare to that, is Joe Courtney. Joe Courtney won a very narrow election back in 2006. I remember that, although I did not remember how close it was. He won by 83 votes out of, over 250,000, which is amazing. It was by far the closest election that year. But ever since then, he's become an institution. I imagine he will continue to win that until he either retires or decides to hand it over to somebody else, something like that. Of course, I guess that's the same thing. At any rate, so it tracks pretty much. You may want to take a look at your own district as well and see if it fits that pattern. Next section. I attended a memorial service. I actually was hired to sing there. It's a church where my wife and I have a long history. And I didn't know who the service was for because I heard the name, but I didn't recognize the name at first because he didn't go by his first name, went by a nickname. And once I got there and saw the picture, I went, oh, yeah, I know him. I don't know him well. I just knew him. And we'd talk every once in a while. I do get hired to sing at these things every once in a while. You may be aware of my 7-part Ave Maria that I did with Justin Halley, where he helped out so much. I have a link to that YouTube video in case you're interested. And usually I have to kind of brace myself when I go to memorial service because they can be very sad. This wasn't like that. This was incredibly uplifting. It's amazing that apparently this guy, and I'm deliberately not using his name because I didn't talk to the family about mentioning this publicly or anything. But at any rate, he lived into his 80s, and he'd been a member of that church for over 50 years. I learned from the people who spoke that he'd had a very difficult childhood, orphan, moved around multiple places, had poverty issues, all kinds of problems and all that, and yet eventually wound up in a good situation where they really cared about him, and it was good. And yet somehow he came out an upbeat, positive, and friendly person to basically everybody he met. He was a teacher for many, many years, as was his wife, and he and his wife were inseparable. In fact, that's what I remember most about him personally. I mean, again, I only knew him a little bit, is that I talked to him, and he was always very happy and friendly, and he was pretty much inseparable from his wife. He smiled a lot, you know. So it was, he was very fond of dad jokes. The story they kept telling at the different people said at the memorial service is that him telling the jokes was much funnier than the jokes themselves because he was incapable of telling the joke without laughing himself before he ever got to the punchline. So interesting. But one saying that came up, apparently he had a favorite saying he used to use, which I'm surprised I'd never heard. He said, nobody cares how much you know, but everybody knows how much you care. And that immediately comes across like a cliche, but it's a good one and very interesting. And I like the fact that that was his philosophy, and I'm going to try to hang on to that one. I kind of believe that in a way, and I try to push that myself without being too naive or, you know, brace yourself for problems. But still, in these polarized days where expressing sympathy or empathy or anything like that is viewed it's not only looked down upon by a certain segment of the population, it's viewed as an opportunity for them to take advantage of you. It's good to see some people are willing to be kind anyway. And I agree with that. I do get taken advantage of now and again, but only once per person. You get one shot, but then then we go on. But I try. Any rate, at my age, I know who I am. I know what I'm like, and that's kind of it. But it's nice to know there were others who I would agree with, and I kind of wish I'd gotten a chance to know them better. But at least I was glad I was there and was able to contribute in some small way. Okay. Next section is that I put out a new Mockito video this week. The Mockito video is called Mock Final Classes and Methods. So I uploaded that to the Tales from the Jar Side YouTube channel, and the video is embedded in the newsletter. You can click on it and watch it there, or you can go to the YouTube channel and see it if you're interested in that sort of thing. It's one of those videos that actually came out better than I was hoping, and there's some advice at the end as to when to use this and maybe more importantly, when not to, what to watch out for, that sort of thing. If you have any feedback, please feel free to let me know. Again, it's based on my Mockito Made Clear book, or a topic that was covered in there, which I have to point out, if you watched last week's newsletter, I have to mention this week the book fell out of that top 30 on the bestseller list, and I don't know that it'll reappear. I mean, it would probably take something surprising like a big Reddit thread or something like that. I don't know. I'm not great at marketing. I'm doing this. I figure that's about all I can do. So I suppose I should at least open the link to show, yep, there's I've magnified so much. You only see the cover there. But there's Mockito Made Clear and all the information about it. Good enough. Okay. Once again, I released it late on a Friday afternoon. So let's take a look real quickly just to see what the view count is on that. I'll have to stop it so it doesn't play automatically. It looks like we're up to 26 views, which, okay, hey, that's something. We'll see how it goes. The last one wound up somewhere in the 50s. So, small audience, but a small group of interested people too. So we'll see. Okay, let's move on to this week's Tweets and Toots, which I thought there were some really funny ones this week that I collected. I put this section called What Does the Fox Say? Remember that song cue from a couple years ago. Someone here named Vivian said, I love the take that foxes are just cat software running on dog hardware. And as soon as I read that, I went, yeah, that works for me. That makes a lot of sense. So I thought that was very clever. The next one is titled Susan Being Lazy, which I'm going to anticipate this. There we are. And the tweet says, kitchenware company boss. So, did you come up with a name for that revolving food tray, Susan? And Susan replies, no, couldn't be ours. And couldn't be bothered, basically, for those in Americans. In the wildly unlikely case that you don't get it, a lazy Susan looks like this. It's basically a rotating plate where you can put food on it or whatever, and people can rotate it around to where they happen to be. And of course, you see all these options came up at Amazon when I searched on it. So for what it's worth, but I thought that was pretty fun. Okay, we have an AI joke. This one says, git commit-m, git GPT-4 said it would work, which yeah, absolutely. Again, one of the problems with those AI tools is that they are so sure that they're right. They're so convincing. And somebody would go ahead and commit that to their Git repository, or commit the changes it suggested without testing or anything else because, hey, GPT-4 said it was okay. Yeah, it seems so sure of itself. I thought that was very clever. Here was one about kindness. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. Well, I will. Dmitry Gozubinski, perhaps? Grozubinski. Any rate, said the laughs you get, and by the way, this was in response to a question about some way. I think it was a woman was planning to speak to some high school students and wanted a way to tell them not to be, well, let's just say jerks. And he came up with this quote, which is himself. I mean, it's not quoting from somebody, he just made it up. But that's why I put it in the form of a quote. Said the laughs you get for being cruel are false, born of relief that they are not a target, and the hope that they can delay becoming one. The sneers you get for being kind are false too, born of discomfort and hope that no one will notice they don't measure up. Choose kindness. It's very interesting. I think that could be tightened up a little bit, but I really like the mood, the expression there. And who knows, maybe it will help somebody. But it's always nice to encourage kindness. I think that's a good thing. Although, again, I don't want to be unrealistic about the fact that some people will try to take advantage. I mean, they will. And you don't know who that's going to be ahead of time normally. So again, my policy is, okay, I give them one shot and then we'll see. Okay, so let's move on. Here was a joke that would have worked out beautifully in 1979 from Dad Jokes. It says, Astronaut 1, I can't find any milk for my coffee. And Astronaut 2 says, in space, no one can. Here, use cream. Which, again, I'm old enough. I saw the original Alien movie in theaters, the original Alien one, when it came out in the summer of 1979. I remember because I was away from home for actually, I think it was my second summer away from home, but I said first there. At any rate, a friend and I, my roommate at the time, watched it during a matinee, and we emerged in the middle of daylight because it was a matinee and we were still freaked out. And even now the movie pretty much holds up, but back then it was absolutely terrifying. The funny part, again, is that we came out and there was another poster for another movie running at the same time, which I think was the James Bond movie Moonraker, which has been largely forgotten and dismissed as one of the ultimately silly Bond movies. And we both came out and went, geez, maybe we should have gone to see that instead. Now, of course, in retrospect, Alien is an absolute classic. So, okay, we got over it, but still. So again, on the off chance that you didn't get the gag, the tagline for the Alien movie was, in space, no one can hear you scream, which is a brilliant tagline, although it wasn't really true. Lots of people screamed in that movie and everybody heard them, but you get the idea. There was a good daylight saving time joke. The reference to Princess Bride, I've just sucked 1 hour of your life away. Tell me, how does it feel? As stated by Count Rugen in Princess Bride when putting Westley on the machine. So I think I'm over that hour change, but I hate that adjustment every year. But it'll be back in the fall, so I'll grab my hour then. Speaking of AI, this great toot on Mastodon said a machine learning algorithm walks into a bar and the bartender says, "What do you have?" And the algorithm says, "What's everyone else having?" Which, boy, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? Generalized from the most common cases. I've got to find somewhere to use that gag. That's a good one. This one, again on Mastodon, somebody said, whenever I see something that says it's lab tested, I assume they let a Labrador chew on it for a while and called it good. So Labrador tested. So lab tested is short for that. I think that's great. Now I'm always going to have that image anytime I hear something being lab tested. That's wonderful. This one I titled Keep Your Appointments. The image said, heads up guys, there are some real weirdos in this group. Someone messaged me asking to meet up in the woods for a naked satanic ritual, and then they didn't even show up. Yeah, And my thought was, well, maybe they started without you, and maybe you're better off you weren't there. At any rate, I thought it was amusing. This one says, where have you gone, Karen Carpenter? Which I know, very sad story, but the title fit for me. And it's an image with a lot of vultures in it with the caption, why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? And that ought to get that song in your head, Close to You from the Carpenters. And with vultures, I don't think that's what she meant. And of course, I just said, must be the breadcrumbs I keep in my pocket. Yeah, that's got to be it. Right. This one I entitled Indiana Jones and the Comfort of Tenure. It's a picture of Indiana Jones with the caption on front, the text box saying, some of my friends are discussing why Harrison Ford is still playing Indiana Jones. But honestly, having an 80-year-old professor not retire is like the most accurate part of the whole franchise. I've already gotten a reply to that from someone who teaches a lot in community colleges, and it hit a little too close to home. And then this one, which needs a little explanation for non-technical people, I titled it Beware March 15th. Doesn't have the same ring to it. So in celebration, beware the Ides of March. And of course, I'm taking the developer interpretation where IDE is integrated development environment. So you see, that's presumably Brutus, I guess, typing into his editor for C in conspirators, C.STA, and it looks like the IDE is prompting stab Caesar, which, yeah, that figures. Et2 developer. So have a great week, everybody. As a reminder, you could see all my upcoming training courses on the O'Reilly Learning Platform at this link, and upcoming NFJS virtual workshops at this link. This week I've got the third week. Oh, I got it wrong. So that was week 2 last week of Spring and Spring Boot in 3 weeks. This week it's week 3, I believe. Actually, maybe I am off by 1 on that. Maybe it is week 1 and week 2. Any rate, and then I've got a Gradle course as well as a No Fluff virtual workshop. At any rate, the links will have it right. So I want to thank everybody for making it this far. Please consider liking the post or commenting, or feel free to subscribe. And I'll try to put up another technical video later in the week. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I'll see you all next week. Take care.